Hi, this video builds on a previous video on the theoretical perspectives in demography where we mentioned the demographic transition theory. And here we're going to continue some discussion of that, but also consider ways of observing that in the empirical world. And if we study population pyramids, we can look for particular shapes that reflect the various stages of the demographic transition. Now, in the previous presentation, we had mentioned three stages: the early stage, where population is kept in check by high birth and high death rates; the explosion or population boom that takes place when the epidemiological transition initiates; and then stage 3, when the fertility transition initiates, where births are decreased to catch up with the lower death rate. Now, in some cases, countries have entered into a stage 4, which is actually population shrinkage, where the death rate has come to exceed the birth rate. And this is sort of a rough view of what the population pyramids look like at these different stages. If we look at the history of European population change in terms of births and deaths, we see that the predictive ability of demographic transition theory is actually remarkable. That you do see this predicted stage 1 equilibrium going on with high births and high death rates. You see the population explosion of the epidemiological transition. You see the fertility levels coming down, fertility transition, and then actually that continues on, and you start to see where deaths might actually surpass births. Time-wise, we can actually put dates on Europe's transitions. In 1650, everything up to 1650, we should say, was stage 1, characterization of high birth, high death, with very little growth or transition. From 1650 to 1875, we saw what might be characterized as a stage 2, with high birth and low death. By 1875, we're now seeing births come down, and that carries on through 1920, and now, since 1920, there's been a low to zero growth on the European continent, with some countries already achieving negative growth. And of course, as we looked at those population pyramids and thought about age structure, you've got to remember that the demographic transition has lots of implications for the structure of age groups within populations. If you have a high birth, high death society, you tend to have more younger people at stage 1, right? That's why it looks like a pyramid when you look at the population pyramid. But in the more advanced stages, where there's a higher death rate than birth rate, you have a larger elderly population. And at best, a large middle-aged population exists. The sweet spot is when most of your population is sort of middle-aged and of working age, because that's when you have the lowest dependency ratio, and that's going to bring lots of economic benefits to a country. But it's hard to sustain. Most countries go through that, and then they transition into the later stages, where they have a large elderly population, and that of course leads to a new kind of dependency ratio, and so forth. The big question mark now for global population growth is Africa. And if we compare Europe and Africa, we can see a starkly different phenomena or pattern. The trend line in Africa still looks exponential, whereas Europe has leveled off, as we noted, as it's gone through the full demographic transition. Finally, this table shows where different countries are in terms of transition, with varying levels of rate of natural increase. Those with the higher rate are in the second stage typically. Those with the lower tend to be further along. And that will conclude our discussion of the demographic transition, looking at current trends. Thanks for watching.